500 years ago, a man sat in a cold room outside Florence, exiled, stripped of every title, every connection, every illusion he had ever carried about how power works. He had served the Republic faithfully. He had negotiated with kings, with popes, with generals who could end a city with a single command. He had believed, as you probably believe right now, that competence, loyalty, and good intentions would be enough to protect him. They were not. He was removed, replaced, forgotten overnight by the very people he had served. And in that silence, in the humiliation of being discarded by a system he had given everything to, Niccolò Machiavelli did something that most people in his position never do. He did not beg to be let back in. He did not perform regret. He did not adjust his personality to become more palatable to those who had thrown him away. Instead, he sat down and wrote the most dangerous book in the history of political thought. A book so honest about how power actually operates that it was banned, burned, denounced by the church, and condemned by every institution that depended on people not understanding the rules. And yet, 5 centuries later, that book is still being read, still being studied, still quietly shaping the thinking of every person who has ever held real influence in any domain. Not because it teaches cruelty, because it teaches clarity. The kind of clarity that most people spend their entire lives avoiding because it is uncomfortable, because it removes the safety net of moral performance, because it forces you to see the world not as you wish it were, but as it actually is. And that clarity, when you possess it, makes you something that the world does not quite know how to handle. It makes you dangerously smart. This video contains 8 lessons drawn from that clarity, not paraphrased from self-help culture, not softened for comfort, taken directly from the logic of a man who watched power from the inside, lost everything, and then wrote down exactly how it works, without apology, without decoration, without the slightest concern for whether you would like what he had to say. If you are ready to hear them, stay. If not, this is not the video for you. And I say that with no judgment. Some truths are not for everyone. These are for the ones who would rather be uncomfortable and clear than comfortable and blind. The first lesson: people do not respond to your intentions. They respond to your position. This is where most people fail before they even begin. And it is where Machiavelli's thinking departs most sharply from everything you were taught growing up. You were told that if your heart is in the right place, people will see it. That if you mean well, your meaning will be received. That sincerity is a kind of armor. Machiavelli watched that belief destroy careers, end alliances, and cost men their lives. Because the truth, the operational, observable, testable truth, is that nobody has access to your intentions. Nobody can see inside your chest and verify that what you feel is what you claim to feel. All they have is what you show them. Your position, your posture, the signals you send through action, through timing, through the way you respond under pressure. And they will judge you. They will always judge you, not by what you meant to do, but by what they perceived you to have done. This is not cynicism. This is the first principle of human interaction that almost no one is willing to state plainly. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must concern himself, not with what he is, but with what he appears to be, not because appearance is superior to substance, but because appearance is the only channel through which substance can be communicated. You can be the most generous, most competent, most honest person in any room. But if your behavior does not communicate those qualities in a way that is legible to the people around you, they do not exist. They are invisible. And invisible virtues protect no one. Think about the last time you were misunderstood. Not because you were unclear, but because someone assigned a meaning to your behavior that had nothing to do with your actual motivation. You said something direct, and it was read as aggression. You were quiet, and it was read as indifference. You helped someone, and it was read as weakness. In every one of those moments, the same principle was operating. People do not interpret your behavior through the lens of your intentions. They interpret it through the lens of their own fears, their own insecurities, their own strategic calculations. And once you understand this, truly understand it, not as a theory, but as an operating reality, you stop wasting energy trying to be understood and start managing what you project. Not as manipulation, as clarity, as the decision to take responsibility for the signal you send rather than expecting the world to decode your inner complexity on its own. This single shift from intention-based thinking to position-based thinking is the difference between people who are perpetually frustrated that the world does not see them accurately, and people who are consistently treated with the respect and seriousness they have earned. Machiavelli was not teaching deception. He was teaching you to stop being naive about how perception works. And that lesson alone, applied consistently, will change more about your life than 1,000 affirmations ever could. I have seen people transform the way they are treated in professional environments, in relationships, in families, not by becoming different, but by becoming deliberate about the signal they send. The shift is not personality, it is awareness, and once you have it, you cannot unlearn it. You start seeing the gap between intention and perception everywhere, in yourself and in everyone around you, and that sight, once acquired, is permanent. But position is only the beginning, because even if you master perception, even if you learn to project exactly what serves you, there is a second mechanism operating in every hierarchy you will ever enter. A mechanism that has destroyed more talented people than any external enemy ever could. And understanding it before it finds you is the difference between a career that stalls and a career that arrives. The second lesson, never outshine the person above you until you are ready to replace them. This is one of the most dangerous dynamics in any hierarchy, and Machiavelli understood it with surgical precision because he had lived inside it. He had watched brilliant men destroyed, not by enemies, not by incompetence, but by their own excellence, displayed at the wrong moment, in front of the wrong audience. Here is the mechanism. When you demonstrate superiority, in competence, in insight, in charisma, to someone who holds power over you, you do not earn their admiration. You earn their anxiety. Because every person in a position of authority, no matter how secure they appear, carries a quiet awareness that their position is not permanent, that someone, somewhere, could replace them. And the moment you make that possibility visible, the moment you make them feel that you could do what they do, perhaps better, you have not demonstrated your value. You have declared yourself a threat. And threats, in any power structure, are not promoted. They are neutralized. Think about your own experience. Think about the colleague who was obviously the smartest person in the room and somehow never advanced. Think about the employee who solved problems their manager could not solve and then found themselves sidelined, transferred, or quietly excluded from the conversations that mattered. This was not bad luck. This was the mechanism operating exactly as Machiavelli described. The lesson is not to hide your intelligence. The lesson is to understand timing. There is a season for visibility and a season for restraint. The dangerously smart person knows which season they are in. They build quietly. They let the person above them feel secure, feel supported, feel enhanced by their presence, not diminished by it. And then when the moment comes, when the position opens, when the structure shifts, when the opportunity arrives, they step forward with a foundation that was built in silence, not in spectacle. Machiavelli watched men who announced their ambitions get crushed by the very people who could have elevated them. And he watched men who managed their visibility with discipline arrive at positions of power that seemed, to everyone who had not been paying attention, to come from nowhere. It did not come from nowhere. It came from the understanding that in any hierarchy, perception of loyalty matters more than demonstrations of brilliance, until the moment it does not. And recognizing that moment is the difference between the person who spends their career serving someone else's vision and the person who eventually gets to execute their own. Let me say this differently, because I want it to land. Your brilliance is not the problem. Your timing is, and the correction is not to become less. It is to become more strategic about when and how you become visible. The world is full of brilliant people who are invisible, not because they lack talent, but because they displayed it at the wrong moment, to the wrong audience, and were punished for it in ways they never fully understood. Do not be one of them. Now the first two lessons dealt with how others see you and how you navigate hierarchy. The third lesson goes somewhere more personal, more uncomfortable. Because it is about something you have been taught to believe is unconditionally good, and Machiavelli is about to tell you why it is destroying you. The third lesson, the appearance of mercy, is more valuable than mercy itself. This is the lesson that makes people uncomfortable, and I want to be precise about why, because the discomfort is itself informative. Machiavelli did not argue against mercy. He argued against mercy as performance. Mercy that is given, not because it serves any strategic purpose, but because the person giving it wants to feel or appear virtuous. And he argued this because he had watched what happens when mercy is extended without calculation. It is consumed, it is taken for granted. It is interpreted not as generosity, but as weakness. And the person who was shown mercy does not become loyal. They become emboldened. Here is the operational principle. When you forgive someone who wronged you without any cost to them, without any visible deliberation, without any sense that the forgiveness was a choice rather than a reflex, you teach them that the wrong carries no consequence. And when an action carries no consequence, it will be repeated. Not because the person is evil, because human behavior follows incentive structures, and you have just demonstrated that the incentive for wronging you is zero. Machiavelli's insight was not that you should be cruel. It was that cruelty applied once, decisively, at the right moment, creates more stability, and ultimately causes less suffering than kindness applied indiscriminately over a long period. The prince who punishes one transgression severely and then governs with openness is feared once and respected indefinitely. The prince who forgives every transgression and then, in desperation, lashes out unpredictably, that prince is feared always and respected never. Apply this to your own life. Think about the relationships where you forgave too quickly, too completely, without any acknowledgement from the other person that they understood what they had done. What happened? In almost every case, the behavior repeated. Not because your forgiveness was wrong in principle, but because it was wrong in execution. It communicated that your boundaries are suggestions, not structures. That your pain is manageable, not meaningful. That you will absorb whatever is done to you and continue functioning. Which makes you not a partner to be respected, but a resource to be used. The dangerously smart person understands that mercy is a tool, not a personality trait. It is deployed when it serves the relationship, when it builds loyalty, when it creates a debt of gratitude that strengthens the bond. It is withheld when extending it would communicate that the wrong was acceptable. And it is always, always visible, because invisible mercy, mercy that is never acknowledged, is mercy that never happened. I want to pause here for a moment, because if you are feeling resistance to what I just said, if something inside you is pushing back, saying no, mercy should be unconditional, forgiveness should be free, I want you to sit with that resistance. Do not dismiss it, examine it. Ask yourself where it came from. Ask yourself who taught you that boundaries are cruelty and that unlimited forgiveness is strength. and then ask yourself how that belief has worked out for you so far. If the answer is not what you hoped, you are ready for what comes next. The fourth lesson is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all 8, because it asks you to do something that goes against every instinct you have about self-protection. It asks you to listen to the people who want to see you fail. The fourth lesson: your enemies will tell you more than your friends ever will. Machiavelli did not trust flattery. He did not trust loyalty that had not been tested. He did not trust the people who surrounded powerful men with agreement and approval. Because he understood what they were doing. They were managing their own position by making the powerful person feel comfortable. And comfort, in Machiavelli's framework, is the most dangerous state a leader can occupy. Because comfort means the absence of accurate information. It means you are surrounded by people who are telling you what you want to hear, rather than what you need to know. And when you are operating on distorted information, every decision you make is compromised. Not by incompetence, but by the simple fact that you are solving for a reality that does not exist. Your enemies do not have this problem. Your enemies are not invested in your comfort. They are invested in finding your weaknesses, your blind spots, your vulnerabilities. And because they are looking for these things with genuine motivation, they will find them faster and describe them more accurately than any friend or ally ever would. This does not mean you should trust your enemies. It means you should listen to them. When someone criticizes you, especially when the criticism is hostile, especially when it is delivered with the intention to wound, pay attention not to the emotion, to the content, because buried inside the hostility, more often than not, is a piece of information that everyone who loves you was too kind or too afraid to deliver. The dangerously smart person treats hostility as data. They do not react to it. They do not defend against it. They extract the signal from the noise, and they use it. They ask themselves, is there a grain of truth in what this person is saying? Is there a vulnerability they have identified that I have been ignoring? Is there a pattern in my behavior that is visible to my critics and invisible to me? This is the practice that separates people who grow from people who stagnate. The ones who stagnate surround themselves with agreement. The ones who grow surround themselves with honesty. And when honesty does not come voluntarily, they extract it from the only people who have no reason to withhold it. Machiavelli understood that the most dangerous leader is the one who has eliminated all dissent. Not because dissent is pleasant, but because dissent is the only reliable source of corrective information. Kill the messenger, and you do not kill the message. You simply lose access to it. And what you cannot see will eventually destroy you far more thoroughly than anything your enemies could have done if you had simply been willing to look. This is the practice, not once, not as a strategy for a specific situation, as a permanent orientation toward information, toward truth, toward the willingness to hear what is painful, because what is painful is almost always what is most useful. The dangerously smart person does not seek comfort. They seek accuracy. And accuracy, in a world full of people who prefer the pleasant lie to the difficult truth, is the rarest and most valuable resource there is. If you are still here, if you have not turned away, then you are already different from most people who encounter these ideas. Most people stop at the lesson that makes them uncomfortable. You are still listening, and the next lesson will test that resolve. Because it is about something you do every day, something you believe makes you a good person. And Machiavelli is about to show you why it is slowly, quietly, invisibly destroying you. The fifth lesson: generosity without strategy is a slow form of self-destruction. This is the lesson that will cost you the most if you ignore it. And it is the one that most people ignore the longest because it conflicts directly with the identity they have built around being good. Machiavelli observed that princes who were generous without calculation, who gave freely, who shared resources without strategic purpose, who opened their treasury to anyone who asked, were not loved more than those who were careful with their generosity. They were loved less, because generosity that is constant becomes expected, and what is expected is never valued. It becomes the baseline, the minimum, and any deviation from it, any moment where the generous person is unable or unwilling to give, is perceived not as a boundary, but as a betrayal. You have experienced this. You know exactly what I am describing. The friend who always helps and is never thanked. The partner who gives everything and is taken for granted. The professional who over-delivers consistently and is rewarded not with respect, but with higher expectations and no additional compensation. This is not bad luck. This is the predictable outcome of generosity deployed without strategic awareness. Machiavelli's principle was simple. Give, but give visibly, give deliberately, and give in a way that creates obligation. Not cold, calculated obligation, but the natural human sense of reciprocity that emerges when someone understands that what they received was not automatic, that it was chosen, that it could have been withheld, that the person who gave it made a decision to give it to them specifically. This is the difference between being generous and being taken for granted. The difference is not in the amount you give, it is in the visibility of the choice. When your generosity looks like a reflex, it creates no loyalty. When your generosity looks like a decision, a deliberate allocation of scarce resources to this specific person at this specific moment, it creates a bond that lasts. And the paradox that Machiavelli understood, and that most people resist because it conflicts with the fantasy of unconditional generosity, is this: you will ultimately give more, and give more meaningfully, if you learn to give strategically, because strategic generosity is sustainable. Unconditional generosity burns the giver to ash, and leaves the recipients unchanged. Read that again. Think about the people in your life who give without limit. Think about how they are treated. Think about whether their generosity has earned them the love and loyalty they believed it would. In most cases, in almost every case I have ever observed, the answer is no. Not because generosity is wrong, but because generosity without strategy is a signal that says, I do not value what I have. And if you do not value what you have, neither will anyone else. This is not Machiavelli being cruel. This is Machiavelli being honest about a pattern that has repeated itself for 5 centuries without anyone being willing to name it. Now the lessons shift. The first 5 were about how you interact with others: perception, hierarchy, mercy, enemies, generosity. The next 3 are about how you structure yourself, how you think, how you adapt, how you hold power once you have it. And they begin with a principle that contradicts everything the modern world tells you about authenticity. The 6th lesson: adaptability is more important than consistency. The world worships consistency. Be consistent, be reliable, be the same person in every room, in every situation, in every context. And Machiavelli watched this worship get men killed. Because the world is not consistent. Circumstances shift, alliances dissolve. The strategy that worked last year is the liability this year. And the person who refuses to adapt, who clings to a single identity, a single approach, a single way of operating, is not principled. They are rigid, and rigidity in a world that is constantly moving is a death sentence. Machiavelli's metaphor was the river. Fortune, he wrote, is like a flooding river. When it is calm, no one builds defenses. When it floods, it destroys everything in its path. But the prince who has prepared, who has built levees, dug channels, created pathways for the water to flow, that prince survives, not because he is stronger than the river, because he is more adaptable than the flood. The dangerously smart person does not have a fixed identity. They have a fixed center, a set of values, a clarity of purpose, a knowledge of what they want, but the expression of that center changes depending on context. They are diplomatic when diplomacy serves. They are aggressive when aggression serves. They are silent when silence serves. They are loud when volume serves. They do not confuse the strategy with the self. The strategy is the clothing. The self is the body beneath it. And the body does not change when the clothing does. This is the distinction that most people fail to make. They fuse their identity with their behavior. And then, when the situation demands different behavior, they experience it as a threat to who they are. It is not. Changing your approach is not betraying yourself. It is honoring the reality that the world presents different problems at different times, and solving them requires different tools. The person who brings a hammer to every situation is not strong. They are limited. The person who surveys the situation selects the appropriate tool and applies it with precision. That person is not inconsistent. They are intelligent. An intelligence, deployed with the flexibility that Machiavelli advocated, is the quality that separates people who navigate complexity from people who are destroyed by it. The rigid person breaks, the adaptable person bends, and then, when the pressure passes, springs back stronger than before. This is not weakness. This is engineering. The strongest bridges are not the ones that resist movement. They are the ones that are designed to move with the forces acting upon them. And you, if you are paying attention, are being asked to become that kind of structure. Flexible in expression, unbreakable in core. 2 lessons remain, and these final 2 are the ones that separate the person who has read Machiavelli from the person who has understood him. The 7th lesson is his most famous, his most quoted, and his most catastrophically misunderstood. The 7th lesson: it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. This is the most quoted, most misunderstood, most weaponized sentence in the entire Machiavellian canon. And I want to take it apart carefully, because what it actually means is not what you think it means. Machiavelli did not say that fear is superior to love as a governing principle. He said that if you have to choose, if the situation forces a binary, which it sometimes does, fear is more reliable than love, and here is why. Love is conditional. Love is sustained by the continuous satisfaction of the other person's needs and expectations. The moment you fail to satisfy, the moment you disappoint, the moment you are unable to give what was expected, love evaporates. Not because the person who loved you is shallow, because love, as a social bond, is maintained by positive reinforcement. Remove the reinforcement, and the bond weakens. Fear operates on a different mechanism. Fear is sustained not by what you give, but by what you might do. It does not require continuous investment. It does not require you to perform generosity or availability or warmth. It requires only the credible perception that crossing you carries a cost. And that perception, once established, is remarkably durable. Now, and this is the part that most people who quote Machiavelli leave out. He was explicit that fear must never become hatred. The prince who is feared is respected. The prince who is hated is in danger. And the line between fear and hatred is drawn by one thing: fairness. If the consequences you impose are perceived as proportionate, as earned, as the natural result of the other person's choices, you are feared and respected. If the consequences are perceived as arbitrary, as cruel, as disproportionate, you are hated. And hatred, unlike fear, does not create stability. It creates enemies who are willing to sacrifice their own position to destroy yours. The dangerously smart person understands that the ideal position, the position Machiavelli actually advocated, though it is rarely quoted, is to be both feared and loved. To be someone who is genuinely warm, genuinely generous, genuinely present, and simultaneously someone who is known to have limits that are enforced without hesitation, someone who will give you everything and will also take everything back if you betray the trust on which it was built. This combination, warmth with boundaries, generosity with consequences, is the rarest and most powerful form of social presence. It is what makes people feel safe and alert at the same time, protected and accountable, loved and respectful. This is not a contradiction, this is mastery. And the person who achieves it does not need to choose between being feared and being loved. They become something more useful than either. They become someone who is taken seriously. And that being taken seriously is not a feeling. It is a position earned by the precise, deliberate, sustained demonstration that you are someone who can hold both warmth and consequence in the same hand without flinching. Most people can do one. Almost nobody can do both. And the person who can, the person who makes you feel loved and alert, at the same time that person does not need title, does not need volume, does not need performance. They need only to walk into the room. The room does the rest. We have arrived at the final lesson, and I saved it for last deliberately, because this is the one that governs all the others. This is the principle that, once understood, transforms every interaction, every negotiation, every conflict, every relationship from a struggle into something closer to architecture. This is the lesson that separates the student of Machiavelli from the master. The eighth lesson. The greatest victories are the ones that never look like victory. This is the final lesson, and in many ways it is the most important, because it governs all the others. Machiavelli understood that the most effective exercise of power is the one that is invisible. The negotiation that ends with the other side believing they got what they wanted. The conflict that is resolved before it ever becomes visible. The influence that is exercised so subtly that the person being influenced believes the decision was entirely their own. This is the highest form of strategic intelligence. Not the ability to win battles, the ability to avoid battles entirely by arranging conditions so that the outcome you want emerges naturally from the situation without anyone perceiving that it was arranged. Think about the most powerful people you have ever observed, not the loud ones, not the ones who announce their victories, but the ones who seem to move through the world with an unusual ease, as if circumstances keep aligning in their favor by coincidence. It is not coincidence, it is the application of this principle. They have learned to shape situations upstream to influence the conditions before the decision point arrives, so that when the moment of choice comes, the option they prefer is also the option that appears most natural, most logical, most attractive to everyone involved. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the prince who wins without fighting. Not pacifism, strategic architecture. The construction of a reality in which your preferred outcome is the path of least resistance for everyone around you. And the brilliance of this approach is not just that it works. It is that it leaves no trace, no resentment, no opposition, no sense that anyone was outmaneuvered. Just a quiet, persistent pattern of things going the way you intended, and a room full of people who believe it was their idea all along. This is what Machiavelli gave the world. Not cruelty, not cynicism, not a manual for tyranny. He gave us honesty, the kind of honesty that most people find intolerable because it removes the comfortable illusions that make social life feel safe. He told us that people judge by appearances, that generosity without strategy destroys the giver, that adaptability is survival, that mercy without consequence is indistinguishable from weakness, that the person who is feared and loved simultaneously is the person who holds real power, and that the greatest victories are the ones nobody sees. These are not pleasant truths, but they are operational truths. They describe the world as it functions, not as we wish it functioned. And the person who internalizes them, not as weapons, but as instruments of clarity, becomes something that the world quietly recognizes and instinctively respects. Not because they are ruthless, because they are awake. They see the mechanisms that everyone else pretends do not exist. They navigate the currents that everyone else denies are there, and they do it not from a place of malice, but from the deepest possible respect for reality, the only foundation on which anything lasting can be built. If what I have described in this video reached something in you, not because it was comfortable, but because it was true, then I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which lesson hit the hardest. Which one did you recognize from your own life, not as a theory, but as a scar? Which one have you been living without ever having the language for it until now? Tell me. Not because it helps the algorithm, though it does, because writing it down forces you to confront it. And confrontation, honest, unflinching confrontation with the truth of how power works and how you have been navigating it, is the first step toward becoming someone who does not just survive the game, but understands it well enough to play it on their own terms. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, ask yourself why. Not as pressure, as a genuine question. If this content resonates with the way you already think, if it gives language to the patterns you have already observed, if it makes you feel less alone in your refusal to accept the polished, comfortable, profoundly dishonest version of reality that most content offers, then this is where you belong. Villain theory is not for everyone. It is for the ones who would rather know than be comfortable. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one, because the next one goes even deeper, and you are ready for it, even if you do not believe that yet.